Silence isn't passivity in Machiavelli's playbook, it's a weapon. Used well, it hides your aims, exhausts your rivals, and makes your words worth more when you finally choose to speak. In this video, we'll explore 6 moments when silence multiplies your power, arranged into 5 tight chapters you can remember and use. In Machiavellian thinking, the earliest phase of any design is the most delicate, not because the idea lacks merit, but because it lacks defenses. A plan is weakest when it is still forming, when it is a shadow, more intention than infrastructure. At that stage, silence is not shyness, it is armor. It protects the plan from premature judgment, from opportunists who would repurpose it, and from rivals who need only a glimpse to build counters. Disclosure at this point magnifies risk without conferring strength, because audiences habitually overestimate what they have heard and underestimate what they have not seen. Machiavelli's psychology of power assumes a crowded field of watchers, allies, skeptics, subordinates, superiors, enemies, and the undecided. Each group listens for different reasons, yet every ear introduces volatility. Early details invite second-guessing and raise barriers that had not existed. Envy among peers, caution among superiors, anxiety among partners whose positions feel threatened. The mere existence of chatter can force a scheme into the open before it has matured, where it becomes the subject of committee instincts and moral grandstanding. Silence, by contrast, denies the crowd an object to attack or defend. It buys the most valuable asset in politics and strategy, time to prepare. There is also the matter of appearances, a theme Machiavelli returns to repeatedly. People judge by surfaces because they must. The world is too complex to do otherwise. When a plan is young, every surface is misleading. Early numbers look small, early prototypes look crude, early coalitions look thin. If the public judges by these surfaces, the verdict will be premature and punishing. By withholding the plan, one postpones that judgment until the surfaces match the substance, until the rough edges have been ground down and the optics are favorable. Silence, then, is a way of editing reality before it premieres. A second current runs beneath Machiavelli's caution, the inevitability of resistance once intentions are known. Human groups are loss-averse. They mobilize faster to block change than to build it. The first weapon of resistance is not force, it is delay. Requests for more information, calls for transparency, demands for guarantees that no plan can honestly give at inception. The moment intentions are declared, the opposition's incentives become clear. Organize, lobby, leak, harden. Silence clouds those incentives. It confuses timelines, diffuses urgency, and keeps potential opponents in a waiting posture while preparations advance. To understand the mindset, imagine plans as fortresses, expensive to signal and cheap to shell when unfinished. A half-built wall provokes attack because it reveals where the gate will be. The Machiavellian builder avoids flying banners over scaffolding. He completes in quiet, then chooses the moment of revelation when the walls can answer stones with stones. This is not theatricality for its own sake. It is recognition that power rests on perceptions of inevitability. The reveal should come only when the plan looks as if it has already happened, when its reversal appears costlier than its acceptance. Machiavelli's pairing of the lion and the fox captures the logic. The lion represents open force. The fox represents cunning, especially in the management of information. When a plan is embryonic, fox-like virtues dominate. Cunning here is less about deception than about sequencing. Not every truth deserves equal timing. Some truths strengthen when delayed. A precise calendar of intentions, disclosed early, is a gift to adversaries. Ambiguity preserves flexibility, allowing adjustments without visible retreats and shielding the strategist from accusations of inconsistency. In public life, changing one's mind looks like weakness. In private planning, changing one's mind is prudence. Silence reconciles the two. There is also a safeguard against vanity. The most dangerous impulse at the start of a plan is the hunger for recognition. Announcing an idea produces a quick counterfeit reward, applause, interest, the sense of momentum. Machiavelli would treat this as a trap. A claim settles debts you have not yet incurred. It makes you spend political capital before you possess it. Worse, it creates historians before there is history. inviting people to record promises that you will later be judged against. You become answerable to narratives instead of realities. Silence refuses that exchange rate. It keeps the account balanced, results first, stories later. In hierarchical settings, the discipline of quiet becomes even more strategic. Superiors are inclined to evaluate not only proposals, but proposers. Intention can be read as ambition, and ambition can trigger protective reflexes. A still-forming plan, announced too boldly, can look like a bid for territory or influence. Even allies may flinch, sensing future obligations they are not ready to shoulder. The Machiavellian posture is patience with perception. Let others supply the significance after the fact. It is better to be discovered as necessary than to be declared as aspiring. Silence also counters the market for rumors. Information abhors a vacuum, and yet not all vacuums are equal. When nothing official exists, unofficial talk tends to be incoherent and contradictory, which paradoxically helps the planner. Rivals waste time chasing phantoms. Skeptics tire of guessing. Supporters avoid committing to fantasies. A controlled quiet creates noise without signal, and in that fog, preparation can proceed. The alternative, a steady drip of specifics, generates signal without strength, letting others triangulate your position and lay mines along your road. Risk management sits at the center of this mindset. Early stages are defined by uncertainty, unknown allies, untested assumptions, variable resources. Every public claim becomes a future constraint. Every detail disclosed narrows the field of acceptable pivots. Machiavelli's prudence favors optionality. By keeping intentions unspoken, one preserves exit routes and alternative paths. If conditions shift, adjustments occur in private, without the reputational penalties of a public reversal. The quiet plan is thus more adaptable than the announced plan, and adaptability, in a world governed by fortuna, is a form of strength. There is a final, more subtle reason for silence. It creates scarcity around one's voice. Words are like currency. The more one spends, the less each coin is worth. A strategist who speaks constantly becomes predictable and ignorable. A strategist who speaks rarely and whose words are tied to outcomes acquires gravity. The audience learns to attend, rivals learn to infer less, allies learn to wait. Over time, the silence itself becomes signaling. If nothing is being said, something is being done. The myth of competence grows in the spaces between statements. All of this should not be mistaken for secrecy as a permanent condition. Machiavelli is not counseling muteness, but timing. The silence of the shadow phase is temporary and purposeful. It ends when the plan can withstand scrutiny, when the elements that would have drawn fire now draw acceptance, and when disclosure serves consolidation rather than exposure. The reveal is not a confession, it is a declaration. The plan emerges as a fact among facts, not a plea among opinions. In the end, the mindset is austere. It asks for restraint in a culture that rewards display, for patience in a climate that applauds speed, and for inward confidence while outwardly conceding nothing. It treats language as a strategic asset and time as a silent ally. A plan that grows in the dark is not hiding from the world. It is preparing to meet the world on terms of its own choosing. In Machiavellian terms, emotion on the other side is not simply heat, it is light. Anger, panic, triumph, humiliation, jealousy. Each state reorganizes a person's priorities and weakens their filters. When feeling runs high, people telegraph what matters to them most urgently, where they feel exposed, what they hope you will concede, which deadlines actually bind them, whom they fear disappointing. Silence at such moments functions like a clean pane of glass. It does not add to the scene, it allows the scene to reveal itself. Every extra word would fog the view. The psychology is straightforward. Strong emotion narrows attention and strains self-monitoring. Under arousal, the mind simplifies complexity into a single story that justifies what it already wants. In that narrow beam, people commit to positions before they have examined them, produce reasons to defend impulses, and leak facts to support freshly minted narratives. Machiavelli's interest here is not therapeutic, it is structural. Power is a contest over what becomes common knowledge and when. An emotional adversary generates common knowledge against themselves, Admissions, exaggerations, timelines, and threats that, once spoken, cannot be unsaid. Silence increases the odds that those disclosures keep flowing, unimpeded by counterblows that would give them a new focus. Silence also changes the social meaning of the exchange. In most hierarchies, reactivity is read as lower status and composure as higher status. The person who must explain, justify, and jabber is implicitly acknowledging the other's centrality. This is why courtroom cross-examinations and high-stakes negotiations revolve around pauses. The still figure appears larger because everyone else orbits around their quiet. In political terms, that stillness is a form of virtu, the self-command that resists being drafted into the opponent's script. Emotion seeks to conscript, quiet refuses the uniform. When tempers flare, language becomes performative. People speak to signal loyalty to their side, to cement a coalition, or to save face in front of an audience that may be physically present or imagined. The more public the stage, the more ceremonial the words. Outrage looks outward, fear looks inward, pride looks upward. Each trajectory exposes different seams. Outrage reveals who must be appeased to end the spectacle. Fear reveals the catastrophe model driving decisions. Pride reveals the reputational stakes that outrank material ones. The listener who does not compete for the spotlight learns which knobs actually turn the machine. There is a second-order effect as well. Emotion breeds projection. In silence, others will populate your intentions with their own anxieties. They will assume plans, motives, and thresholds that match their fears. Often those imagined positions are more advantageous to you than anything you could have plausibly claimed. By not contradicting or collaborating with their projections, you let them bargain against a phantom they authored. Machiavelli's fox does not always counterfeit tracks. Sometimes it simply allows hunters to misread the prints already in the dirt. At peak emotion, time itself distorts. The other side experiences urgency as necessity and expects the same compression from you. Silence restores ordinary time. It refuses imported deadlines, which are weapons disguised as calendars. When people are agitated, they create false emergencies and then inhabit them. They ask for immediate declarations that bind the future to the temperature of the present. Quiet resists the binding. It lets the fever run its course so that when speech arrives, it meets a different climate, one in which cooler listeners can hear without defending yesterday's theatrics. Because emotion so often seeks witnesses, it inflates the cost of being wrong in public and lowers the cost of doubling down. The noisy adversary becomes invested in their own narrative arc, even if that arc drags them toward weaker ground. Silence denies them a sparring partner to bounce back from. Without resistance to unify them or a counterattack to rally against, factions within their side begin to notice their differences. The maximalists upset by the moderates, the ideologues by the pragmatists, the budget watchers by the reputation guardians. Emotional unity depends on a foil. Quiet dissolves the silhouette. There is also the legal and archival dimension, something a Florentine statesman would recognize even in a world without microphones. Words leave residue. In volatile moments, people volunteer statements that later function as commitments, exhibits, or wounds. Silence keeps your record thin, while theirs grows heavy. Power, in part, is the management of future quotations. When an opponent is emotional, they compose tomorrow's liabilities today. The refusal to add your own impulsive sentences is not timidity, it is conservation. Machiavelli's attention to appearances is relevant here. In public struggles, perception of motive often matters more than the motive itself. Emotion paints motives in primary colors: vengeance, vanity, fear. The quiet figure acquires a different palette: seriousness, gravity, inevitability, simply by not joining the chorus. People who are not sure what to think often adopt the stance of the person who appears least ruled by feeling. This is not moral superiority, it is optics. A steady pulse reads as competence. Importantly, silence is not absence of thought. It is concentrated observation. It notices which insults recur, because repetition marks a pressure point. It notices which names are invoked, because named audiences indicate true constituencies. It notices which solutions are dismissed without examination, because the reflexive no reveals forbidden trade-offs. By the time speech becomes necessary, the map is clearer. not a map of slogans, but a map of incentives, fears, and thresholds. Emotion also rearranges risk tolerance. Some will become reckless, gambling for resurrection. Others will become paralyzed, clinging to sunk costs. Both extremes confess more than they intend. The gambler reveals what they consider a survivable loss and what they believe would be fatal. The paralyzed reveal the hostages they dare not endanger. Silence allows these confessions to accumulate without interference, and with accumulation comes pattern. Patterns, once visible, are levers. Finally, there is the question of dignity, an unfashionable word in strategy, but a durable currency in human affairs. People look to leaders for the ability to metabolize heat without dispersing it. A quiet presence amid raised voices communicates that heat does not decide outcomes. Structure does. In Machiavelli's world, fortuna will always throw storms. The ruler's task is not to stop the weather, but to keep the keel. When the other side is blowing hard, silence is ballast. It steadies the vessel, lengthens the horizon, and ensures that when you do speak, the words travel farther than shouts carried off by the wind. In Machiavellian analysis, silence in the presence of higher power is not civility, it is insulation. The point is to reduce the friction that inevitably arises when proximity to authority misaligns incentives. Superiors must guard position, reputation, and narrative coherence. Subordinates must accumulate leverage, resources, and room to maneuver. Speech is the most visible crossing between those interests, and therefore the most dangerous. Silence preserves optionality while allowing the superior's needs to surface without prompting. It creates a space in which status can confirm itself, because authority often seeks mirrors before it seeks maps. A quiet face reflects the image a leader wishes to project. A talking face competes with it. Hierarchy amplifies the cost of misreading motives. Words directed upward are seldom heard at face value. A suggestion reads as a bid for influence. A correction reads as a challenge. A warning reads as an alibi in advance. The same sentence that would be neutral among peers becomes charged by the slope of the organizational terrain. Machiavelli's attention to appearances is decisive here. Courts, whether princely or corporate, do not arbitrate truth, they arbitrate signals. By speaking sparingly, the subordinate reduces the inventory of signals to be misinterpreted. Composure becomes the message, reliability without self-advertisement, presence without presumption. There is a politics of memory at work. Superiors keep ledgers, explicit or tacit, of who causes problems, who absorbs them, and who appears in the story only when outcomes are good. Silence edits one's presence in those ledgers. A reputation for discretion grows not from a single noble act, but from an absence of quotable moments when others were losing theirs. Over time, the quiet subordinate becomes a safe container for sensitive information. That is not merely moral capital, it is political capital, trust that can be converted into access, and access that can be converted into influence without open contest for it. Machiavelli's vocabulary of virtù and fortuna maps cleanly onto this vertical dynamic. Leaders want to appear masters of unpredictability, bending chance to purpose. The subordinate who fills the air with analysis threatens that theatre by implying that control rests elsewhere, with the model, the memo, the metrics. Silence allows the superior's virtù to remain visually intact. Later, when the wind has shifted and the result is known, well-chosen words can retroactively align facts with the leader's narrative without advertising authorship. Influence exercised after the fact is duller to rivals' eyes and gentler on the superior's pride. Silence also clarifies appetite. Many leaders ask for candor and mean it only under specific conditions, privately, after the theatre, and framed as refinement rather than reproach. Because the request and the tolerance are frequently out of sync, early speech exposes a subordinate to a test they cannot pass. Too blunt, and the messenger becomes the message. Too timid, and the content dies unheard. Quiet observation reveals not only what the superior says they want, but what they reward when they actually get it. The gap between professed and operative values is the real constitution of any regime. Speaking into that gap without understanding it is a form of self-sabotage. Status has a time signature. Superiors often prefer to speak first to set the field, last to sanctify the outcome, and intermittently to reassert tempo. A subordinate who talks through these beats is not just verbose. They are off rhythm, which reads as insubordination even when the substance is useful. Silence, by contrast, allows the superior's cadence to establish itself. Within that cadence, a few precise contributions can land as reinforcement rather than opposition. The same sentence, delivered out of time, is a threat. Delivered in time, it is loyalty. The difference is audible only when the air has been left quiet long enough to hear the rhythm. Above, the social topography is rarely smooth. Every visible leader stands on a nest of unseen coalitions: courtiers, financiers, gatekeepers, technocrats, family, and favorites. Words travel through that lattice and are reinterpreted at every node. Silence limits how much raw material those intermediaries have to work with. It also prevents the accidental creation of new coalitions against the speaker. In many systems, the alliance most dangerous to the subordinate is the alliance they are rumored to be forming. Speaking less leaves fewer lines for others to connect. Ego protection explains much of the delicate etiquette. Authority is a magnet for envy from above, peers, and below, ambitious subordinates, and for fear from those responsible for the leader's image. The superior's psychology therefore carries a standing need to feel informed without feeling instructed, to feel supported without feeling managed. Silence accommodates this need by converting knowledge into presence rather than performance. The subordinate becomes a stable object in the leader's field, close enough to be useful, not so active as to be threatening. In this way, quiet is not a withdrawal from ambition, but an investment in sustainability. Courts generate their own weather, gusts of fashion, storms of scandal, droughts of attention. Words spoken at the wrong barometric pressure become artifacts, the quote that circulates, the phrase that anchors a reputation unfairly. Machiavelli understood the danger of becoming a proverb in someone else's mouth. Silence, while never total, reduces the chance of being reduced. It is a filter against caricature, because caricature needs content to exaggerate. To be the one who always requires a record of always. Sparse records resist that kind of condensation. There is a moral temptation to confuse silence with cowardice and speech with integrity. Machiavelli is colder. He separates private judgment from public performance and evaluates each by its consequences. In his arithmetic, a truth that cannot be placed without destroying one's ability to act later is not prudence. It is a self-indulgence of the tongue. The question is not whether a statement is accurate, but whether it improves the position from which future actions can be taken. Silence keeps that position intact, while knowledge matures into leverage. The economy of credit and blame also tilts toward quiet. In hierarchical worlds, success flows upward and failure trickles down. Speaking loudly at the moment of proposal ensures that the credit, if it comes, will be contested. Speaking loudly at the moment of warning ensures that the blame, if it comes, will find a well-sculpted scapegoat. Silence moderates exposure to both extremes. When good outcomes arrive, proximity, not proclamation, often decides who is remembered. When bad outcomes arrive, noisiness furnishes the archive from which guilt is assembled. The quiet subordinate neither starves nor feeds those archives. Strategic ambiguity deserves attention. Superiors often test subordinates for signs of factional alignment. Whose language do you use? Which metaphors? Which enemy? Clear answers can secure short-term favor while narrowing long-term pathways. Silence, paired with neutral formulations when speech is unavoidable, keeps doors open to multiple camps without triggering suspicion of duplicity. Ambiguity is not lying. It is refusing to let others conscript your future into their present categories. Machiavelli would regard that refusal as a guard against Fortuna, whose favorite trick is to invert yesterday's orthodoxy. Not all leaders are alike. Some are insecure and hungry for reassurance. Some are visionary and allergic to breaks. Some are bureaucratic and worship process. Some are theatrical and need a chorus. Silence adapts to each. With the insecure, it reads as safety. With the visionary as non-friction. With the bureaucrat as respect for form. with the theatrical as stagecraft that does not steal the scene. A single habit, sparse, well-timed speech, covers many temperaments because it reduces the chance of accidental offense while increasing the odds that, when words appear, they answer a felt need. The law of diminishing returns applies to voice. In any closed system, the marginal value of each additional word declines faster for the subordinate than for the superior. Leaders are paid to talk, subordinates are paid to change outcomes. By conserving speech, the subordinate raises its price. When they finally speak, listeners assume importance because scarcity has trained them to. Authority is partly a function of expectation. Silence calibrates expectation in one's favor. Historical sensibility matters. Courts remember precedents. If a previous outspoken counselor was sacrificed during a crisis to demonstrate decisiveness, the institution will carry that memory like a reflex. The walls themselves develop preferences. Silence is a way of reading those preferences before colliding with them. It keeps the subordinate from inheriting the role of the necessary victim, a regularly recurring figure in the theatre of power where a leader proves independence by cutting off the hand that seemed to guide it. None of this endorses muteness. The Machiavellian aim is leverage without spectacle. Speech retains its place as a decisive instrument, but only after reconnaissance has converted mystery into map. The quiet period before that moment is not empty. It is densely observational. It measures appetite, tracks loyalties, identifies veto players, distinguishes the leader's personal interest from the regime's structural interest, and separates the problems that threaten the throne from those that merely bruise the ruler. When speech finally arrives, it can be framed as service to the structure rather than correction of the person, which is the only framing that survives pride. Silence towards superiors, then, is a discipline of restraint in a world that confuses performance with proof. It protects from the misprisions of status, preserves the elasticity of one's future roles, and allows authority to feel whole while assistance is smuggled in under the banner of deference. The mindset is simple to state and costly to uphold. Let the higher power remain higher in sight while you accumulate the invisible currencies that outlast a single meeting: trust, access, and the right to choose the moment when words become fate. Envy is the heat that rises when proximity meets inequality. It ignites most fiercely among near equals, colleagues on the same rung, rivals in the same circle, peers who share a reference group and therefore feel your advance as their retreat. In Machiavelli's frame, this is not a moral failing, but a structural fact of human comparison. People measure themselves by what is close at hand. A distant prince can be admired. The neighbor's sudden fortune feels intrusive. Where admiration says, "I too might reach that height," envy whispers, "That height was mine until you stood there." In such air, words have a way of becoming accelerants. Silence, by contrast, behaves like stone. It absorbs heat without changing shape. What inflames envy is not only success, but the narration of success. Story converts outcomes into hierarchy. The more a victory is described as authored by genius, grit, singular vision, the more it assigns lesser roles to those nearby. Credit that clings too tightly to a single figure becomes a map of exclusions. Machiavelli understood that courts punish the conspicuous winner not only for winning, but for allowing others to feel written out. Quiet interrupts this script. It denies the room the spectacle of triumphal authorship and leaves open interpretive space in which others can locate themselves without humiliation. Appearance governs as strongly as substance. In settings thick with envy, a loud explanation of what worked feels like a lecture on why others failed. Even gratitude, if paraded, can curdle into display, an exhibition of how many people one can afford to thank. The social eye is sensitive to these tones. Silence avoids the tonal problem because it declines to perform the meanings that hover around success: superiority, inevitability, chosenness. It lets results sit as facts, not as proofs about the moral order. Envy is economical. It taxes visibility. Each unit of attention paid to the winner becomes revenue for resentment. The tax collector is gossip, supple, omnivorous, ravenous for motive. Explanations, clarifications, and humble brags provide the raw material. Quiet starves the office mint. With fewer coins of narration in circulation, rumor must work harder, and because rumor prefers shortcuts, it often contradicts itself. Contradiction weakens coalitions, which are built on shared stories about who deserves what. Where tales are muddy, alliances form slowly. Where tales are crisp, enemies recruit. There is a paradox here. Envy hunts for arrogance, yet it is equally provoked by rehearsed modesty. False downplaying is legible. It reads as strategy, and strategy reads as contempt. The mind, thickened by envy, is looking for insult in subtler frequencies. Timing, emphasis, the way a smile lasts a beat too long. Silence avoids this double bind by refusing the stage on which sincerity and self-display are adjudicated. It is not a declaration of saintliness, it is the choice not to audition for a part that the room is eager to assign. The politics of credit and blame sharpen in crowded rooms. Credit is scarce and public. Blame is plentiful and private. A visible winner becomes the most convenient vessel for both admiration and deferred punishment. When a later setback requires a scapegoat, archives of quotes and clips make the selection easy. Machiavelli's counsel, read coldly, treats this as risk management. Minimize archives. The quiet figure leaves fewer handles for others to grab, fewer phrases to be bent into evidence of overreach. In a regime where memories are curated and weaponized, the thinnest record is the strongest shield. Envy is often strongest sideways, but it is policed from above. Superiors may like success in theory, while fearing the political wake it generates. A subordinate who attracts envy obliges leadership to engage in expensive maintenance, soothing, rebalancing, moving resources to calm the aggrieved. Silence reduces the maintenance cost you impose on the system. It presents success as non-frictional, as something that does not force the hierarchy to choose between praising you and pacifying others. In that light, quiet is a form of loyalty, not the noisy loyalty of flattery, but the structural loyalty of non-disruption. Coalitions respond to symbols. Visible winners become symbols, and symbols simplify decisions for those who oppose them. A name condenses into a banner invites arrows. By declining the rhetoric that turns a person into a banner, silence keeps the symbol from hardening. It blurs the outline just enough that grievances cannot rally around a single silhouette. In practical terms, this slows the conversion of private irritations into public campaigns. People who cannot agree on the meaning of your rise will struggle to agree on tactics to check it. There is also the delicate sociology of esteem. Esteem is finite within a group. Its expansion for one member can feel like deflation for another. Public self-interpretation, why the strategy was brilliant, why the bet was brave, claims esteem directly. Quiet lets esteem be conferred rather than claimed. Conferred esteem draws less fire because it embarrasses no one into conceding it. When the room is thick with envy, the crucial difference is not between having esteem and lacking it, but between receiving it as a byproduct of necessity and harvesting it as if it were owed. Machiavelli would separate the usefulness of reputation from the burden of fame. Reputation is the predictable expectation of competence. Fame is the unpredictable swarm of attention. The first multiplies leverage, the second multiplies exposure. Envy feeds on fame, not reputation. The silent posture favors the former, a stable, almost boring reliability that accrues over time and does not require continuous narration. It is less intoxicating, which is precisely why it is survivable. Where envy is active, language becomes a terrain seeded with tripwires. Jokes misfire upward, explanations are heard as excuses, neutral data points are treated as victory laps. Even candor can be reinterpreted as aroma, the tone of someone who thinks they own the place. It is tempting to correct these misreadings in the moment, to fight semantics with more words, but the room's mood outruns your precision. Silence declines to chase misinterpretation across a field already tilted by feeling. It accepts that some narratives must exhaust themselves before facts are audible. The dynamic is ancient but accelerates with modern amplification. Rooms are no longer bounded by walls. They include feeds, group chats, and side channels where small slights are enlarged by repetition. In such systems, every public syllable instantly gains afterlives. A quiet posture reduces the number of afterlives to manage. When speech does occur, it can be channeled through formats less prone to distortion, succinct confirmations, sparse acknowledgements, rather than the sprawling self-explanations that envy loves to shred. There is a subtler calculus at play, the difference between being necessary and being celebrated. Necessary actors are resented less because removal is costlier than dislike. Celebration is discretionary. Necessity is structural. Silence nudges perception toward necessity by divorcing performance from outcome. A figure who appears only when the machine needs talk reads as part of the machine, not a personality perched above it. This is Machiavelli's cool preference, to be embedded in function rather than suspended in spectacle. Fortuna roams this terrain as well. Envy spikes when the distribution of luck seems uneven. The more a success looks like a clean line from merit to result, the more it triggers the comparative anguish of those who feel equally meritorious. When success is presented as a knot of timing, circumstance, and work, the sting is duller. Silence cooperates with this presentation by refusing to polish the narrative into a fable of desert. It leaves room for ambiguity about causal weights, and ambiguity is a balm in rooms that cannot bear the thought that outcomes are perfectly just. None of this rejects pride. It relocates it. Pride becomes inward, tied to craft, to standard, to the sober knowledge of what was required, rather than outward, tied to applause cycles and the fluctuating favor of peers. The mindset is not meekness, but containment. It treats social volatility as weather to be outlasted, not a debate to be won. The discipline is to let results speak at a lower volume than ego would prefer, and for longer than impatience finds comfortable. In the end, a room thick with envy is a test of stability. It asks whether one can hold advantage without broadcasting it, whether one can be legible enough to be trusted and illegible enough to be safe. Machiavelli's answer is the quiet spine. Presence that neither invites worship nor provokes revolt, outcomes delivered without choreography, and a public posture that converts attention into durability rather than into fuel for the next blaze. In Machiavellian thinking, the hush around a negotiation is not absence, it is pressure. Most people enter a bargaining room already rehearsing their lines, offers, justifications, fallback positions. The compulsion to speak is an anxiety to control the narrative before reality intrudes. Silence interrupts that reflex. It transfers the discomfort to the other side, and in doing so, it draws out what performance usually conceals: real stakes, real deadlines, real ceilings. A quiet negotiator becomes a mirror in which the counterpart watches themselves argue, first with you, then with their budget, then with their pride. That sequence is revealing. Under the weight of their own monologue, they disclose which concessions cost them esteem, which are merely arithmetic, and which names they are secretly trying to please. Silence is the instrument that turns a single conversation into an X-ray of a whole organization. Power in a deal is largely the power to set tempo. Words run fast. Quiet moves time at your speed. After a term is placed on the table, the unfilled air around it becomes a test. People reach to fill that air with reasons, and reasons are leverage because reasons can be traded. The more they explain, the more you learn the structure behind the number, the fiscal year that truly matters, the procurement rule that can bend, the superior who cares about optics more than price. In the theatre of bargaining, many lines are for show. Silence helps you sort the props from the load-bearing beams. There is always a second audience, the other side's own coalition. In multi-party settings, boards, partners, legal advisors, speech from you can act like glue for them, giving their factions a common enemy or a unifying objection. Quiet has the opposite effect. Without a new provocation to rally against, their internal seams open. One ally worries about cost, another about precedent, a third about how the agreement will be sold to their base. If you are not the noise in the room, their side begins to generate its own weather. Out of that weather come contradictions and tells that no amount of questioning would have produced. Silence also manipulates inference. In bargaining, what is unsaid is as communicative as any sentence. Not defending a price implies you do not need the deal. Not correcting a misread of your alternatives implies that your alternatives are strong. The dog that didn't bark is a signal in itself. Machiavelli would call this the fox's economy. Instead of building elaborate traps, exploit the opponent's need to explain your calm. They will often explain it to your advantage, constructing a version of your position that overestimates your options and underestimates your constraints. You gain reputation for strength at the cheapest possible rate, without having claimed it. Because negotiation is also theatre, there is a question of face. People rarely concede to arguments. They concede to circumstances that let them keep their dignity. Words, even the wise ones, can crowd dignity out of the room. Silence gives it a seat. When a counterpart changes course, the quiet space permits them to rename the shift as prudence, not defeat. Agreements close faster when the story of closing does not humiliate anyone who must defend it later. Silence is the protective wrapping for that story. It hides the mess of compromise, leaving only the finished surface to show. None of this means quiet is blank. The presence beneath it matters. Stillness that reads as indifference can be fatal. Stillness that reads as listening projects authority. In a negotiation, authority is partly acoustic, whose voice resets the room, whose pauses carry meaning, whose restraint sets the price of attention. If you speak rarely and only at points of decision, your sentences acquire weight beyond their syllables. The other side begins to anticipate them and, paradoxically, to preempt them by offering what they think you might ask for. Silence, then, becomes an engine for volunteered concessions. There is risk in excess articulation, especially at the edges of a deal. People ruin good terms by gilding them, revisiting them, clarifying them until they leak. The instinct to add "just to be clear" is a tell that you fear losing control of what you have already achieved. Machiavelli's counsel is colder. When the shape is favorable, freeze it. In the final approach to agreement, silence helps harden wet cement. The less you say, the fewer angles exist for late objections to seize. On the record, you remain minimal. Off the record, the other side must carry the burden of revision. Cultural and situational textures complicate this art, but they do not cancel it. Some rooms expect fast talk, others prize deliberation. In either case, quiet calibrates expectations. In a rapid-fire culture, measured pauses look like confidence. In a contemplative culture, they look like respect. Both readings benefit you. The key is that silence be inhabited, not vacant. Attention visible in posture, patience visible in eyes, readiness visible when it is time to convert from listening to decision. Virtue is not muteness, it is mastery of timing. Then there is the silence that comes after the deal, the hush of victory. It is the twin that many strategists forget, and it may be the more important of the two. Noise after success invites a second contest, usually one you did not need to fight. Triumphal narration writes a script for the defeated to resist. They are cast as fools, villains, or obstacles overcome, and they will seek an alternate ending. Quiet denies them an antagonist. It lets the outcome settle into normalcy before anyone organizes nostalgia for the status quo ante. In politics as in commerce, the most durable victories are the ones that become boring quickly. Attention is a tax on winners. The more you collect it, the more constituencies you inadvertently mobilize. Rivals who feel eclipsed, allies who feel entitled to larger shares, neutrals who dislike any actor that begins to loom. A disciplined quiet keeps your surface area small during the fragile period of consolidation. You redirect energy from narration to installation. Personnel, processes, routines that convert a win into a system. Systems are harder to attack than personalities because you can argue against a person. You must live with a process. The record you leave on the day after matters because archives harden into reputations, and reputations attract coalitions. Loud winners generate quotes that later become cudgels, boasts that make future setbacks look like justice, taunts that give opponents a grievance with a face. Quiet winners leave little to memorialize. When the inevitable turbulence arrives, there are fewer sentences to be replayed as evidence that you deserved it. In Machiavelli's ledger, that is not modesty, it is insurance. Silence after victory also shapes attribution. The more you explain, the more you claim. The more you claim, the more you awaken envy among peers and anxiety above you. Better that others compose the story. Some will overcredit luck. Others will overcredit your competence. Still others will attribute the outcome to the logic of events itself. The distribution of explanations deflects heat away from you personally and toward a sense that this was always going to happen. Inevitability is a better shield than genius. There is an ethics of restraint embedded here, but it is strategic, not sentimental. People accept losses more easily when they can preserve a shard of self-respect. Silence leaves them that shard. No victory is complete if it requires the loser's public humiliation, because humiliation keeps grievances hot. A quiet posture feels like restraint, and restraint reads as legitimacy. Legitimacy makes future enforcement cheaper. You spend less capital policing what the system itself begins to sustain. Victory also creates risk on the winner's side. Appetite expands. Allies arrive with memory of promises you may not have made. Supporters imagine dividends you cannot pay. Noise feeds those imaginations. Quiet starves them. When you say little, expectations reset closer to what the structure can actually bear. That keeps you from becoming a prisoner of your own parade. Myth grows in silence. Details invite debunking. Gaps invite legend. A spare public record around a successful move allows others to supply the grandeur that serves them, and by extension, you. They will reinterpret your restraint as depth, your absence from the spotlight as omniscience. Machiavelli would not mistake this for truth. He would recognize it as a resource. Perceived depth intimidates new challengers more effectively than performed bravado, because bravado can be measured. Depth is conjecture. Fortuna remains. Winds change. What was advantage today may be exposure tomorrow. Post-victory silence preserves optionality in the face of that change. If the field tilts, you can pivot without contradicting a litany of public declarations. Your story is not overfitted to yesterday's weather. You have not promised a permanence that the world will take pleasure in disproving. The quiet that follows triumph should not be mistaken for withdrawal. It is work turned inward, converting symbolic wins into administrative facts, cooling the metal so it holds shape, letting the losers find honorable exits while you secure the gates. Many fights are lost after they are won because the victor could not resist narrating the win to the point of reopening the war. The discipline is to let the field believe the match ended of its own accord, with the scoreline obvious and unremarkable. Two silences, then. One that compresses the bargaining table until truth leaks out, and one that dilutes the square until resentment dissipates. Both are refusals. Refusals to subsidize the other side's impulse to perform, refusals to feed the coalition that would form against you, refusals to trade temporary euphoria for durable control. In a world that confuses talk with traction, they are the rare techniques that create value by leaving nothing quotable behind.